Hello, and welcome back to Chess Tactic Today. We have a thrilling David versus Goliath matchup from the World Rapid Championship as Brandon Jacobson takes on the legendary Hikaru Nakamura. Get ready for a strategic roller coaster because this game starts with a surprise and ends with a bang. Pawn to a4, and right away, Jacobson throws a curveball. This is the where opening, a very rare choice designed to sidestep theory and ask Black, what do you do now? It's a bold psychological choice against a top player. Hikaru responds with pawn to e5, a classic, principled reply. He's not fazed, simply taking control of the center and ignoring the flank shenanigans for now. Pawn to e4. Now White stakes his own claim in the center. We're sort of transposing into a normal king's pawn game, but with this strange a4 pawn already on the board. It will be a factor later, trust me. Knight to f6. Black develops a piece and immediately attacks White's e4 pawn, following the core principles of the opening. Knight to c3. White develops and defends the pawn. Everything looks standard, but that a4 pawn is still lurking. Bishop to b4. We're seeing a Ruy Lopez setup from Black. He puts pressure on the c3 knight, which is the main defender of White's center, a very solid and respected system. Knight to d5. An interesting and aggressive reply. Instead of defending passively, Jacobson challenges Black's knight and bishop immediately, forcing a response. Knight takes knight on d5. Hikaru decides to trade, simplifying the position slightly and removing White's active knight. Pawn takes knight on d5. White recaptures towards the center. This pawn on d5 gives White a space advantage, but it can also become a target. A double-edged position is emerging. Black castles kingside. Safety first! Hikaru gets his king out of the center, connecting his rooks and preparing to complete his development. Pawn to c3. A useful move. It kicks the bishop back and prepares to support White's center with a future d4 pawn push. Bishop to e7. The bishop retreats to a safe and flexible square. From here, it can defend the king or re-enter the game later. Bishop to c4. White develops the bishop to a strong diagonal, eyeing Black's weak f7 square and preparing to castle. Pawn to d6. A solid move from Black, controlling the center and opening a line for his light-squared bishop. Knight to e2. An interesting development choice. Instead of f3, the knight goes to e2, keeping the f-pawn free to move and preparing to support the d4 square. Knight to d7. Hikaru continues his development, preparing to challenge White's control of the center. Pawn to d4. There it is! White strikes in the center, creating tension and opening up the game. This is where the strategic battle really begins. Pawn to c5. A fantastic counterstrike from Black. Instead of dealing with White's center, he challenges it from the side, fighting for control of the d4 square. White castles kingside. The king is now safe, and White is ready to focus on the middle game struggle. Queen to c7. A multifunctional move. The queen adds pressure to the center and prepares to connect the rooks. Pawn takes pawn on c5. White decides to resolve the central tension, opening the d-file. This is a big decision that changes the structure of the game. Knight takes pawn on c5. The Black knight jumps into a beautiful central outpost. It's well placed and difficult to dislodge. Pawn to a5. Remember that move from the start? Now it's being reinforced. White is clamping down on the queenside, restricting Black's b-pawn. Bishop to g4. A clever pin. Black puts pressure on the e2 knight, which is a key defender for White. Pawn to f3. White breaks the pin but slightly weakens the squares around his king, a necessary trade-off. Bishop to d7. The bishop repositions itself, now eyeing the queenside and keeping its options open. Bishop to e3. White develops his last minor piece, controlling key squares and preparing to challenge Black's knight on c5. Pawn to b5. Here we go. Hikaru starts the queenside counterattack, challenging White's pawn structure and creating space for his pieces. The battle is heating up. Bishop to a2. The bishop retreats to safety, but it remains a very powerful piece, controlling that long diagonal. Rook to c8. Black brings his rook to the semi-open c-file, putting more pressure on the queenside. This is a classic plan you can use in your own games. Queen to d2. A solid, centralizing move. The queen connects the rooks and prepares to support white's plans on either side of the board. Rook to e8. The rook moves to the e-file, which could become a point of contention later in the game. Pawn to b4. White pushes forward on the queen side, forcing the powerful black knight to move. The initiative is starting to shift. Knight to a6. The knight is pushed to the edge of the board. It's not a great square, but it's the best option available. Rook to c1. White seizes the c-file. This is a major strategic achievement. Doubled rooks on an open file are an incredibly powerful weapon. Queen to b7. The queen moves out of the way of the rooks and keeps an eye on the queenside action. And here it is! Pawn to c4! Jacobson rips open the queenside. This is the moment the game's tension explodes. He's challenging black's control and trying to create weaknesses. This is a bold, committal move that says, let's fight. Pawn takes pawn on c4. Hikaru accepts the challenge, opening lines and hoping his pieces can find active squares. Bishop takes pawn on c4. White recaptures, and now has a very active bishop controlling key diagonals. Knight to c7. The knight reroutes back into the game, aiming to control the b5 square. Pawn to a6. Look at that pawn. It's an absolute monster. It clamps down on black's position, restricts the b7 square, and will be a constant headache for Hikaru for the rest of the game. This little pawn just became the star of the show. Queen to b8. The queen is forced back into a passive position by that incredible a6 pawn. Knight to c3. White improves the position of his knight, preparing to jump into the action, maybe to the e4 or a4 squares. Knight to a8. A very awkward-looking move, but black is trying to regroup his forces and deal with the pressure on the queenside. Knight to e4. The white knight lands on a beautiful central square, creating threats and putting more pressure on black's cramped position. Knight to b6. The black knight finally finds a good square, challenging white's bishop and trying to untangle. Bishop to f1, a calm and prophylactic move. The bishop steps back, preparing to redeploy and keeping the king safe. Rook to d8. Hikaru brings another piece into the game, but is getting harder and harder to find a constructive plan. Pawn to b5. White continues to press on the queen side, fixing black's weaknesses and preparing to create a passed pawn. The pressure is relentless. Pawn to f5. Lashing out. Hikaru tries to create counterplay on the king side, kicking the white knight from its strong post on e4. Knight to c3. The knight simply retreats, having done its job. White's position is still rock solid. Bishop to f6. A good developing move, putting the bishop on an active diagonal, but the real problems are on the other side of the board. Knight to a4. This move sets up a dangerous idea, trading off black's best defensive piece, the knight on b6. Rook takes rook on c1. Black decides to trade a pair of rooks to relieve some of the pressure. Queen takes rook on c1. White recaptures, and the queen now controls the vital c-file. Rook to c8. Hikaru immediately challenges white's control of the file. A fight for dominance begins. Queen to d2. The queen sidesteps, keeping control of important squares and avoiding a trade. Bishop to d8. The bishop moves to a more defensive square, trying to hold the position together. Queen to f2. White repositions the queen, getting ready to support an attack on the king side if the opportunity arises. Knight takes knight on a4. Hikaru eliminates the troublesome knight, but this opens the a-file for white's rook. Rook takes knight on a4. White now has a powerful rook on the a-file, adding even more pressure to the queen side. Rook to c7. Black's rook is tied down to defensive duties. The position is becoming critical. Rook to b4. A fantastic rook lift. The rook swings over to the b-file, preparing to support the advance of the b-pawn. The real fireworks are about to begin. Key moment! Oh, wow! Pawn to f4 from Nakamura. In a desperate position, he sacrifices a pawn to create chaos and distract white from the queenside attack. This is a move born of necessity. Would you have played this? It's a last-ditch effort to turn the tide. The turning point. Bishop takes a 7, and Jacobson calls the bluff. He coolly accepts the pawn, removes the defender of the rook, and correctly assesses that his queenside attack is simply unstoppable. This is the point of no return. White's advantage is now decisive. Rook takes bishop on a 7. Black recaptures, but now white's passed pawns are ready to roll. Pawn to b6. The avalanche begins. This pawn is a dagger aimed at the heart of black's position, threatening to split the defense wide open. Rook to a8. The rook is forced back, trying to set up a blockade, but it's too little too late. Pawn to b7. Unbelievable! The pawn reaches the 7th rank. It's just one square away from becoming a queen, and it completely paralyzes black's position. Rook to a 7. Black has no choice but to passively watch the pawn, his pieces tied in knots. Queen to c2. The queen swings back, getting ready to deliver the final blows. White is playing with deadly precision. Pawn to g6. A small move to create an escape square for the king, but it doesn't change the outcome. Bishop to d3. The bishop joins the attack, taking aim at the weakened kingside. King to f7. The king tries to run, but there's nowhere to hide. King to f1. A subtle but strong move. The king steps away from any potential back-rank tricks, securing the victory. Bishop to a5. A final attempt to create complications by attacking the rook. Rook to b1. The rook simply sidesteps the threat. White is in complete control. Bishop to d8. The bishop retreats again. Black is just shuffling pieces, waiting for the inevitable. Queen to b3. The queen improves its position, adding more pressure and preparing for the final assault. Bishop to a5. Repeating moves, hoping for an error, but Jacobson is not going to slip up now. Rook to c1. A brilliant switch. The rook leaves the b-file and heads to the c-file, preparing to invade on the 6th or 7th rank. What a powerful idea. Bishop to d2. Attacking the rook once more, but it's a futile gesture. Rook to c6. The rook lands on a dominant square, slicing through black's position. Bishop to e3. The bishop tries to create a defensive blockade. Queen to b4. The white queen lines up with the rook, creating unstoppable threats. Bishop to c5. A desperate block, but it only delays the end. Queen to a5. The queen shifts again, lining up a deadly discovered attack. Black's position is completely collapsing. King to e7. The king scrambles for safety, but the net is closing. Queen to c7. The queen invades, forcing a trade of rooks or a catastrophic loss of material. Rook takes rook on a8 is forced, but the queen trade is disastrous. Queen to b8 wins. Queen takes rook on b8. White simplifies into a completely winning endgame. Rook takes queen on b8. Black recaptures, but now for the final crushing move. The finisher. Rook takes bishop on c5, and that's the final brutal blow. This move shatters black's last defensive hopes. The b-pawn will now march in to become a queen, and Hikaru Nakamura resigns. What an incredible performance by Brandon Jacobson. From a surprising pawn to a 4-on move 1 to a relentless queenside assault, this was a masterpiece of strategic domination. A huge upset and a fantastic game to learn from. Thanks for watching Chess Tactic today, and we'll see you next time.